Welcome, Rob. Thank you for agreeing to be here.
Thanks. I was a little nervous tonight because I know you've had guests like George Mitchell here, and we're not going to be talking about things like world peace tonight. We're just talking about beer.
Well, maybe after we have some beer, we can get to the bottom of world peace.
But I do feel more comfortable because I feel like I know half the people in the audience, and everyone out there is drinking beer, so we're all relaxed, and we'll be more relaxed probably as the night goes on.
This is a safe place indeed.
Yeah.
So I think, a good place to start, as with any story, is right at the beginning here. I mean, can you just talk a little bit about how you got involved in the craft beer industry and most interestingly, what your first job was in a brewery?
Yeah, so I kind of stumbled into the beer business. I went to school in Vermont and studied geology. I loved geology. I loved the sciences. And after college, I felt like I needed to blow off some steam. I was fortunate enough to not have any college debt. And I went out to Colorado and got a job working construction for a year. Did that in Boulder, Colorado, and then moved to the mountains and actually worked in restaurants at night and skied during the day. And after 2 years of that, I felt like I needed to get back to New England and apply myself and possibly put my college degree to work, which my parents were very happy when I told them I was going to finally put my college degree to work that they had funded. So I moved back to Middlebury, Vermont. I had a couple friends there, and I loved Vermont. And my plan was to start getting applications for grad school and go back for an advanced degree in geology and possibly teach geology. And I got back to Vermont. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was June 30th of '93. I got there at about 4 p.m., moved a couple bags into the room I was renting, and called a buddy of mine at about 5 p.m. and said, Ian, he was one of the few people I knew in town. I said, I need a job while I apply to grad school. I'll do anything. I've worked in restaurants. I've done a ton of construction jobs in summers. I'm willing to do anything. Do you know of anything available in the community? And he said, well, I'm actually working at a local brewery in town, and I didn't even really know these breweries existed in communities back then. I figured beer was just made in big plants, maybe 10 or 15 big plants scattered around the country, which was kind of the case back then. But I didn't know about this growing craft beer scene. But he said, actually, my boss today just mentioned that we needed a part-time keg washer. So I've always liked beer, maybe not, I didn't drink good beer in college and after.
It was hard to find.
Yeah, it was hard to find, and it was more expensive. But he said, his boss said they needed a part-time keg washer, and I thought, I can get paid to wash kegs and then leave at the end of the day with free beer. This sounds like a good deal. So I showed up the next morning, July 1st of '94, and applied, which was basically, are you willing to put boots and gloves on and be soaking wet and hot and miserable all day washing kegs? And I said yes, and so by 9 a.m. I had some borrowed boots and gloves and washed kegs for that first day, washed kegs during the second day. And by the second day on the job, I was completely in love with everything I saw. And I don't know if many of you have been to craft breweries. If you haven't, you should visit them. There are a ton in this community, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But just after spending 2 days in the brewery, I saw that it encompassed almost everything that I didn't think one career could encompass. And that was the sciences. There's clearly a lot of science involved with making beer. There's biology. There's physics of boiling liquid and moving liquid from tank to tank. There's an artistic component of formulating recipes. And then there's the mechanics. I've always liked to work with my hands in construction and welding and electrical, and that's all over the place in breweries. So I just fell in love with it. And so after 2 days on the job, I called my parents and got them both on the phone, and they were very excited that I'd finally applied myself, had a track, and I was going to go to grad school for geology, use my degree. And I said, Mom and Dad, there's been a little bit of a change in plans. I'm not going to go to grad school for geology. I'm going to make beer for a living.
And thank you for that.
Yeah, that was basically their response. There was this long pause, And my mom finally said, Rob, one of these days you're going to have to stop living in a fantasy land. But luckily they were, over the long haul supportive, and we wouldn't be where we are without them for sure. But they weren't crazy about the idea initially.
And it didn't take you long from being a keg washer to realize that you wanted to make beer your career, so to speak. And I mean, how did you develop the expertise and the knowledge to, I mean, you launched your brewery, what, a year later? I mean, how did you do it that quickly?
Well, really the answer is I didn't have the expertise even after that year. So one of the, I'll kind of backpedal to that second day. I mean, I think the third day I went in and told my boss, Lawrence Miller, who was running Otter Creek, which was the brewery I was at. I said to Lawrence, I'll spend a year here, and I'd appreciate any opportunity you can give me to learn everything about this brewery. I'll work my butt off, for minimum wage. And he was very supportive of that. And at the time, the industry was growing like crazy. Through the early 80s, all the way through 95, which is when we started selling beer, the industry was just on fire. It was a very small sliver in terms of the overall segment craft beer. When I was at Otter Creek, under 1% of the beer sold in the country was craft beer. But it was growing like crazy. So Otter Creek was growing like crazy. And when I started, there were 3 employees. When I left a year later, there were 8 employees. So just kind of by default, I was able to do everything. I washed kegs for the first month. For the second month, I washed kegs and worked on the bottling line. The third month, I started kind of apprenticing in the brew house. And by then, the owner and the more senior guy ahead of me were in the office full time. And towards the last 4 months of working there, I was brewing or at least 2 or 3 batches a day on that brew house 4 days a week. So I was able to get a little bit of experience with everything, and I was fortunate that I had a boss who was supportive in what I wanted to do. And when I was finally ready to leave after that exactly 1 year, he was supportive of me starting a brewery. And I didn't feel right about starting a brewery in Vermont, even though I loved Vermont, starting basically in his backyard because he had taught me the trade. Mm-hmm. So I came over to Maine, and he actually even came over and helped me brew my first batch of beer.